So my name is Mark Seyram Amenyo. Then I work with the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board. I'm also a doctoral student in the Department of Archaeology and Heritage Studies, University of Ghana. Then as part of this project, serving as a research associate, I've been released for a period of 1 year from the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board to undertake this work with the Antislavery Knowledge Network. Okay. So I'm going to be sharing with you database development and then contemporary forms of slavery. However, my presentation as I run through will show that I will be dealing first with issues of contemporary forms of slavery before then I come to the database development bit of it. Okay. Now, this is how my presentation is going to go. First of all, I'll take us through just a brief into the whole context of slavery, just a little bit of it. Then I'll take us again through the historical or indigenous slavery as it pertains in Ghana, just to show some form of change and continuity, okay, from historical perspectives of slavery and then what is pertaining now in Ghana. Okay, so slavery generally is exploitation of human beings for profit. And this is global. It occurs everywhere. The concept of it, or thinking about slavery, often paints different pictures depending on which side of the globe one comes from. For instance, when slavery is mentioned in the ideological West, it may bring pictures of, say, shackles, plantation work, and so forth and so on. But again, in probably Africa or some other area, the mention of slavery may also connote different pictures or may paint different images. Now, indigenous slavery existed in Ghana prior to the infamous transatlantic slave trade, and definitely might have coexisted at the same time as the Atlantic slave trade was in session. Okay. Now, the subject of slavery is still very relevant in contemporary Ghana. Indeed, literature has it, or in the literature we find out correlations between contemporary forms of slavery and issues of, say, environmental destruction, with child slavery being, or child slaves being involved in illegal mining, or galamsey as we refer to it in Ghana. There are also consequences in terms of health, education, the vicious cycle of poverty. Okay. Now, historically, slaves in Ghana are seen as, or were perceived as, commodity. Slaves were property. They could also be inherited. Okay, so a son of a slave owner could inherit the slaves of the father. Okay, however, even in our fieldwork, we've encountered or we've recorded scenarios where people have alluded to the fact that their great-grandparents who were slaves were manumitted. They worked and gained their freedom from their slave owners. And so this is also a possibility, or one very prominent feature of the slavery situation in Africa, or in Ghana for that matter. Also, slaves had possessed an inheritable status. Okay, so the children of slaves became slaves as well. They inherited that status from their fathers or their parents. Also, slaves possessed rights. Okay, and so, for example, the right to life. Slaves had the right to life. They could not just be killed or used for any purpose without the permission of their slave masters, for instance. And so, if a slave, one could not just determine or decide for some other person's slave. Okay, I don't know if that is too clear, but then, yeah. And then slaves could also acquire property. They worked for slave masters. they could acquire property, and through that property, they could also buy themselves out of their slavery status. And then for most of the slaves, they were incorporated into the master's household. Okay, they were very often seen as members of the household of their slave masters. Now, these are also some of the major and minor sources of slavery in terms of historical times. For the most part, slaves were gotten from warfare, from market supply, from pawning, raids and kidnappings, and tribute. And as minor sources from gifts, convicts, private sales, and deception. And as we delve into the contemporary forms now, we'll be able to tell which of these are still very much prevalent under different captions. But you would realize that in terms of the modus operandi, or how slaves were gotten by these methods, it's pretty much the same. Only the caption of the names that are ascribed to these things change. And slaves were also used mainly for agricultural work, farming and fishing, for collecting, livestock rearing, hunting, and a few others. And these same activities in contemporary forms still manifest. Okay. Now, I'd like to also share with us some memories of slavery, tangible and intangible signatures. And these were gathered from Netowrk visits to the field, particularly in the northern region of Ghana and then in the Volta regions. Now we have things like place names, names of towns, names of sites, that always reflect, or that always draw people's attention to the history of slavery. For example, the first name there is Atoko. Atoko in Akan, in Ghanaian language, means to buy and take away. And it was a site where slaves were purchased or slaves were traded. And so we say in Akan, Otwa Naoko, meaning you go and buy and then you go, or you go and sell and then you go. Now, this is a town that is still existent in the Volta region of Ghana, and the mention of the name Atoko brings to mind that history of it. We have other names like Adina or Garimbai. Garimbai also means slave's hometown. And this is located in the northern region of Ghana. We also have family names. Game. Game means in metals, or literally in chains. And so you find somebody with the name Game, meaning the person was born at a time when his or her parents were in chains or or slaves. Again, some family wealth. Some families in Ghana today owe their wealth to their engagement in slave trade. And this is known in the communities. And so there is always that linkage between the wealth of that family and then their association with slave trade. Issues or stories about misfortune. We recorded some instances where people's misfortunes in terms of infertility, barrenness, or inexplicable death are always traced back to their involvement in the slave trade. And so if there's a family where, for instance, females or they keep giving birth to females instead of males, it could be attributable to their involvement in the slave trade, and this is considered misfortunes. There are also objects and sites. Okay, objects like in the picture there, like the shackles, and then the sites. This site is the site of Rafi Angolo, or Vultures River locally, where slaves that passed away during transit were deposited, and vultures, according to the oral accounts, vultures came over and fed on the carcasses. And so due to the number of vultures that would congregate on that site, the site was named Vultures River. Of course, it is no longer that way. This is a picture that shows the site. But then the name Rafi Angolo always brings back that knowledge of slavery or slave trade. There is also religion. Religion where people have always associated, for instance, the coming in of Islam at some point in time drew away from traditional or mainstream slave trading. Okay, and so by some way, people's shift, if you like, from indigenous religious practices to Islam is attributable to their being saved or being, for want of a better word, being taken away from their slave status into the new religious form. Same applies to missionaries or Christianity. However, the memories of slavery are always muted. Some of these stories are laden with bad blood. Okay, and so those who were engaged or whose families were engaged in slavery or slave trade do not, as it were, bring it out in the open. And those who are descendants of slaves, okay, also do not want the story unearthed because of the pain and the sentiments that are attached to slave trade. Now, contemporary forms of slavery. The Global Slavery Index estimates that there are about 45.8 million people worldwide in contemporary forms of slavery, slavery of one form or the other. And these are some of the listings of contemporary forms of slavery: human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, forced or several marriage, exploitation of migrant workers, sale and exploitation of children. Now in Ghana, it is estimated that about 103,000 persons are in one form of modern slavery or the other. The majority of them, of course, being women and children. And we are ranked 59th in terms of countries with the highest number of persons in modern day slavery. And so in the northern and Volta regions where we have visited so far in this research, we have identified human trafficking, forced labor on farms and in fishing communities, bondage, religious or ritual servitude, the famous one being trokosi, which is very difficult to actually categorize as modern forms of slavery because it is a religious practice that brings benefit to the adherents or the followers of the religion. But again, in terms of how the rights of young girls who are taken to shrines to serve the penalties of their parents or relatives who have erred on the side of the deities can also be considered as some form of slavery because their fundamental human rights to a large extent are infringed upon. Okay. We also have sale and exploitation of children, and I have inserted a caption of an online newspaper that captured a 63-year-old man who was caught trying to sell his grandchild. Okay, so clearly the sale and exploitation of children is still very much prevalent, and it's difficult to encounter such things unless this was undertaken and discovered by undercover police who apprehended this man. There is also domestic servitude, which usually goes unnoticed. Indeed, in the homes of a lot of Ghanaians, you will find young girls, young boys who are serving as domestic house workers, who are again schooling, are being taken care of by the families. Okay, and oftentimes they refer to their masters or the house owners within which they work as their uncles or their aunties. And so, and it's not uncommon in the Ghanaian setting to find, for example, my nephew come to live with me. I take care of my nephew in school, and then he or she helps, my nephew helps me in undertaking house chores and all that. But in some other instances, the rights of these children may be infringed upon. Okay, but it's very difficult to tell apart. Then some sources of, or contemporary sources of slaves. The first one is the family. Oftentimes, families, by virtue of their status, inability to take care of their children, could willingly ask that their wards be taken by an uncle, by a relative, by a well-to-do person of the community, to go and live with them, to help them out. Probably they are farmers or they are fisher folk, to go and help them out in their farms or in their canoes. And then, unknown to them, these children are subjected to sometimes very difficult circumstances, very difficult environments, undertaking works that are far beyond their capabilities as children. Also, there is self-imposition. People unable to meet their own basic needs, their livelihoods, could willingly offer themselves for very menial jobs, for jobs on farms, in fishing canoes, in mining, illegal mining centers, just to make some money. And then they are underpaid, they are used for very, very hazardous work, and that also accounts for their self-enslavement or slavery, if you like. There is also sale, like I pointed out earlier, and of course deception. In our field research, a number of instances were recorded where young people have been deceived with better working environments, better work in the larger communities in the cities. They are told of getting very good employment, and willingly, because they want to survive, they want to make ends meet, they follow these people into the cities, and they only encounter situations that are far different from what they were promised. And so a lot of them have ended up in slavery as a result of deception. Now, some vulnerability factors. What are some of the factors that are accounting for these situations? We have, first of all, poverty, lack of livelihood and opportunities. In a lot of the communities we have visited, there is very little that young people can do to survive. And so this pushes them or make them very vulnerable to some of the antics that those who engage in human trafficking. There's also coercion and threats. Some people, due to their inability to pay off debts, for instance, are threatened, and they will have to go by the dictates of the human traffickers or people who champion these causes. And so in order to, as it were, not be faced by the threats or be overtaken by them, they are susceptible to engaging in works that infringe upon their fundamental human rights, works that almost, are synonymous to slavery. Okay. There's also ignorance. A lot of people generally or genuinely do not know about the issue of modern day slavery. They have no idea what it means to be a slave, or how one could be lured into slavery, or what they deserve, assuming if they were to be working. What conditions do they deserve? Under what conditions should they work? What are some of the benefits that they're entitled to? They simply do not know. And so anything at all that will make ends meet for them, it's okay. There is also abuse of power. Wealthy members of communities who are well-to-do can always encourage young people or deceive young people, or even members of their own kin, take them out into big cities and then get them to work for them for very little money or very little remuneration. Now to the database development. So far in the field, this is what we collect. First of all, there's every attempt through literature and oral accounts to identify the sites, and also to locate these sites within the local government areas that is already established by government. There's also an attempt to describe the sites. We take GPS coordinates of the sites, undertake interviews, audio recordings, then visual records, photography, video. And this is a map that I took from Akosi Apebi's 2004 book on indigenous slavery in Ghana. And this map, even though not too clear, sort of connects the slave routes, historical slave routes, right from the northern part of the country to the southern coast where the forts and castles are. And so with this map and then site visits, oral interviews, we gather more about other transit points. A lot of these sites were trading sites but the transit points are not mapped on this site. And so with oral interviews, oral accounts, we're able to gather more information as to some transit points that occurred along these routes. Okay. And this is a snapshot of what we have done so far, trying to put the information that we've gathered into Excel. And for instance, we have Atoko Slave Park, which I mentioned earlier, and then the coordinates, we pick point coordinates. So this is, say, 5 degrees, 46 minutes, 59 seconds north, and then 0 degrees, 49 minutes, 36 seconds east, and a description of the site. And then we try to locate it in the current district in Ghana, and then the current region. This is for the Volta region, and then a similar one for works that have been undertaken in the northern region as well. Then in my time here, I'm going to undergo training in GIS software and applications with the help of Dan, who is here. The objective of which is to enable me to create an interactive platform within which locations, recordings, photographs, and site descriptions of all the sites that are going to be visited can be put on, and then at the click of a button, one can have more in-depth information on particular sites that have been visited all across the country. Thank you very much. Yeah.